This video is sponsored by Describe. In last week's episode of Critical Role Demystified, we discussed the combat where Vox Machina confronted the corrupted archfey Saundor. And when Matt revealed the battle map, I personally felt a bit let down. It's kind of just a bare-bones arena. It's pretty disappointing. Which is a shame because Matt had already started putting together some excellent battle maps in recent fights, so getting this one was extremely underwhelming. Fortunately, we can actually see what some great evil layers look like if we look at Matt Colville's book, Where Evil Lives. This is a beast of a book with more than 20 different layers spanning 19 levels of play. This isn't sponsored or anything, I'm just a Kickstarter backer happy with the product that I got. So I thought it would be fun to take a look at this book and see what lessons we can learn about what makes a great layer, and see where Saundor's lair missed the mark. Now, I'll admit, the title and thumbnail of this video are a bit overblown. I may have indulged in the slightest bit of hyperbole. First of all, Where Evil Lives seems to be more the brainchild of James Picasso than Matt Colville. James is the design director. I knew more of you would click on a thumbnail with Matt Colville's face on it rather than James's. I'm sure James would understand. Second, Matt Colville is close friends with Matt Mercer, so I doubt he'd be wild about me framing this entire video as some sort of competition between them, so that's why I'm dropping that shtick right here at the beginning of the video. Because third, and most importantly, look, I do think the map for Saundor's lair was a bland, boring arena, but I ultimately don't think it wound up being an issue during the game session. For one thing, while the map itself was basically a featureless, bare-bones coliseum, in the world of the game, there were vines hanging from the walls, so the players could climb on those or swing from them if they wanted to. But also, the fight itself was still really compelling. Saundor could phase in and out of the walls of the tree, leaning out of the tree at different heights and firing arrows at the party. He also had a couple of corrupted treants that came to life and fought at his side. And thanks to his lair actions and his special attacks, Saundor had a lot of ways to slow the heroes down and lock them in place, presenting some interesting challenges for them. Plus, despite the fact that Saundor was essentially trapped in his tree and unable to influence the adventure in any way prior to the party's arrival, he turned out to be an incredibly wretched man, so fighting him was still really cathartic and satisfying. So thanks to everything else going on in that fight, it kinda didn't matter that the battle map was a bit disappointing. The fight still worked. But this book can still offer a lot of fun lessons for how we can make some really excellent fights, and I think it'll be useful to contrast them against Saundor's lair, which was efficient and unremarkable. So we can see how a great layer could have helped support a brilliant boss like Saundor, lifting him up to the realm of being truly iconic. And that way, if you're inspired to run a combat like the Saundor fight in your own games, you'll be able to apply some of these lessons and help enhance the adventure. Before we get started, just do me a quick favor and hit the like button. You're going to want to do that before the end of this video anyway, so you might as well get it out of the way now and like the video. I'd really appreciate it. Now we're going to talk about some of the great design choices made in these layers that are not present in the Saundor layer, but before we do, let's cover the things that don't matter. There are some things that these layers do a great job of, but that we don't need to take and apply to the Saundor encounter to make it stronger, because they're either already represented or they don't apply here. For example, this book is full of some really great villains. Honestly, every villain in here is really fascinating and exciting to me. James Picasso and his team really plug themselves directly into the stuff that I personally just truly love. But my favorites include the Cannibal Hag, the Exiled Human Baron, the Undead Librarian, the Medusa Seeking Godhood, the Aboleth Equivalent, because I always love seeing an Aboleth get their due, and the Orc Mob Boss, I guess you'd call him. These are great villains that I would love to deploy at the table, and I have some plans to do just that. And they all have some really cool motivations and personalities. I think they would be really dynamic and fun to play. But of course, Saundor doesn't need any help in this department. He's an archfey incel who is literally and figuratively toxic, so he's also a great villain. The book also has some terrific layer actions for each layer, but I honestly think that Saundor's layer actions also worked just fine. He had some poison gas effects and some vines that restrained the heroes, his layer actions were thematically tied to the toxic layer and his toxic personality, so I've got no complaints. Another thing to note is that MCDM has a unique approach to its notable monsters, something called villain actions. These are distinct from legendary actions or layer actions because they take effect after a bad guy's turn. Only one of them can be used each round, and each one can only be used once. They're essentially crafted as ways to help keep the fight dynamic, almost like introducing different phases to the boss fight and making the encounter more dramatic. This is a big part of MCDM design, and so we're not going to count it against Saundor that he doesn't have these, but they are a cool part of the MCDM boss monster design philosophy. And lastly, this book is also full of spectacular art, and while I obviously don't think that Saundor suffers for not having art like this, I do want to say that one of the reasons I'm really excited to deploy some of these villains in my games is because I am really looking forward to holding up some art and saying, yeah, this is the dude you're fighting, roll initiative. I think that is a fantastic way to get your players excited about a fight. However, if we start looking at the cool things in these layers that I wish were present in the Saundor adventure, we can start right at the beginning of each layer, with the story hooks. Each layer has 3 story hooks designed to help hook your party into the adventure. Now in the case of Saundor, there was an adventure hook. Go and steal Fenthras, the magical bow. And that's all the motivation the players needed. They were always going to go on this adventure because they wanted the magic bow to help fight the dragons in the Chroma Conclave. So what's the issue? Well, the absence of any other Saundor-related plot hooks means nothing else in the Feywild points them towards dealing with Saundor. He's not bothering anybody who doesn't live in his swamp because he literally can't leave the swamp. and the swamp's corruption is kept at bay by the rushing rivers around it. The party had no reason to fight Saundor until the moment they met him and found out that he was an enormous tool. But before that moment, this could have just as easily turned into a heist. Now, throughout the Feywild adventure, the party talked about the Shademirk Bog and the corrupted tree as if it was this big problem that they could solve to help make the Feywild a better place. But that's not true. The Shademirk really isn't bothering anybody. It's not a problem. However, some additional story hooks could have solved this disconnect. For example, in one of the layers from this book, the Ruins of Wrathrock, your party might head to the lair because they took the plot hook to collect the gold reward for going on the quest. But another plot hook involves a plague in a local town. So as the gold-focused party approaches the lair, they might discover the plague and get some additional motivation to deal with this problem, or might reframe what they think of the lair, or better prepare them for what they're going to find inside. Additionally, some great plot hooks can help add context to help enrich the world of the game. This book has layers where the bad guys are goblins, orcs, and hobgoblins, but each of those layers also comes with at least one story hook that makes it very clear that not all goblins or orcs or hobgoblins are evil. And that's really valuable because it helps the players understand the relative morality of the world while also making sure that they know the bad guys can still be judged as bad guys. They're not just mindless monsters. And that opens up a whole world of possibilities. Like the party could potentially negotiate with the bad guys because they're not just bloodthirsty murderers who were born evil. On the other hand, they could execute them with extreme efficiency and ruthlessness and not feel bad because they don't represent all orcs, they just are evil creatures who happen to be orcs. Or we can consider the Burnock Mill. Each plot hook is actually connected to the nobility and local politics, so completing this mission can actually propel the players into another more political adventure. Or take Camp Firefield, a hobgoblin campsite that seems at least somewhat influenced by Red Hand of Doom. And actually, thanks to the Lairs plot hooks, you could actually integrate this lair into that adventure, turning it into a really cool side quest to help take down some enemy forces. Story hooks do more than just get the players on board with an adventure, they also continue to play a role as the adventure plays out. I think we really feel their absence throughout the Feywild arc. The next major difference between the MCDM layers and Saundor's lair, and the most obvious, the one that basically inspired this entire video, is that Saundor's lair is just one big round room. But each layer of Where Evil Lives has multiple different rooms that serve different purposes. That's valuable because having separate additional rooms helps break up the monotony of a layer. Different rooms also allow for different passageways between each chamber, and that helps give the players more options. They can move around the layer with a lot more freedom if the different parts of the layer can be accessed in multiple ways. Now, there are exceptions. Some layers are more linear and don't allow for alternate pathways. For example, the mill is pretty straightforward. Each new chamber of the layer is just the next floor up of the mill, so unless the players scale the outside of the building, they're probably just going to go from one floor to the next. But setting aside the fact that the players do have the option to scale the outside and bypass some rooms, something you can't do with Saundor's lair, which is just one room, but even without that being factored in, just having multiple rooms is still really valuable, even if they don't present multiple pathways between them, because you can also use the different rooms for additional storytelling. For example, imagine if one of the rooms of Saundor's lair was a butcher shop, where he carves up the creatures who get stuck in the swamp and then feasts on their flesh. Now imagine that instead, the additional room is a perfectly preserved bedroom dedicated to the woman who broke his heart, untouched since the day she left. Those two rooms would give you very different information, and each would color how the players thought of Saundor as a character. Now, this is not typically something Matt Mercer has to lean on a lot because he's extremely gifted as a role player. He's really good at delivering exposition through dialogue. But relying exclusively on that also means that a lot of other potential avenues for exposition could wind up being left on the table, as happened with the Saundor layer. And so I think having multiple distinct rooms for each layer gives you a lot more freedom to deliver information to your players, and to do so in different ways. This is actually something we've seen Matt Mercer do before, at least a little bit. In the layer of the White Dragon Rhymefang, one chamber used to be a frost giant village, and the frozen corpses of those giants are still visible as a monument to Rhymefang's tyranny. Whitestone Castle had a ton of other stuff going on when the party was on their way to face the Briarwoods. There were lots of different rooms with lots of interesting stuff going on. So it really is a shame that we don't have anything like that for Saundor's lair. Having separate rooms also provides the possibility that your players will take a rest in the middle of the lair. And this is something that Where Evil Lives actually factors into its design. Each layer has a section detailing what might happen if your players take a rest in the middle of the lair, which is not something I've seen any other D&D dungeon consider, I don't think, but it makes sense that somebody would try it. And so in this case, the creators thought about that, and so they give you the proper tools to handle that if it comes up in your game. Now, Saundor's lair, as we saw it in the live stream, could still work as the final chamber of a more developed lair. However, even that arena didn't have to be quite so empty as it was. We can contrast this lair with the closest thing to it in Where Evil Lives, which is the Voiceless Talker's Experimentation Chamber. It's another big round room, but it also has other features like rows of statues in the middle of the room, two toothy maws on opposite walls, a vat of liquid against the south wall with a living test subject in it, and multiple chests of loot off to the side. There's stuff to interact with in this room. It's actually a little bit more interesting than where we met Saundor. Something else I think this book does really well is add a lot of significance to each lair location. Specifically, there is a reason why each lair is located wherever it is. Let me ask you a question. Why is Saundor's lair inside of a tree? Sure, thematically, I guess it makes sense to put an archfey inside a tree, and I'll even grant you that there's potentially some interesting metaphorical meaning to Saundor living in a hollow tree, since he's described as someone who has a broken heart. You could argue that his chest is hollow. Although I'm stretching a lot with that one, because Saundor was not Davy Jones. He has a lot in common with Davy Jones, but we're not led to believe that his chest is literally empty in the same way, so that parallel could be accidental. But also, why did he fight the party inside a tree? What was gained by it being the inside of a tree specifically? Aside from the vines throughout the arena, which were important to the fight, there was no reason his lair had to be inside of a tree. It didn't add to or change anything. He could have just been in the middle of the swamp, or in a hut, or inside a gigantic beaver dam, and it probably would have worked just as well. But with the lairs in Where Evil Lives, each of the lairs actually does have a lot of significance. The orc villain makes his lair in a tavern because he works as a bartender. That's his front for his criminal empire. The thieves at the Burnock Mill are posing as a bridge troll when they rob people, so their lair is near a bridge. The Hobgoblin lair is a pocket dimension military camp because these hobgoblins are explicitly very militaristic and deeply tied into demons and other magics, so both of those details are represented by this lair. The Shifting Library is like an undead version of the Spirit Library from Avatar, which makes it 1000% my shit, and that also helps capture the personality of the undead historian who serves as the final boss fight of that lair. Even the hag is just living in a classic hag hut because that's just the archetype, and it captures a lot of cool concepts from throughout folklore. And that's something that I think we could all stand to do a much better job of. Don't just think about what kind of lair would be a cool place for the final fight. Think about why the villain is there and what that lair actually says about them. Of course, just because you have a cool idea for a meaningful location for a final boss fight doesn't mean that you can actually come up with a map for it all on your own to actually represent that lair. Sure, these maps in this book are great, but they've got all these highfalutin professional artists making their maps and those fancy pants writers coming up with descriptions and flavor text. You don't have that. Although you could if you use today's sponsor, Describe. Describe is a fantastic online resource full of flavorful descriptions that you can drop directly into your games. They've got descriptions of monsters, NPCs, magic items, and more. They've also got a fantastic selection of maps that you can steal for your games. You don't need to draw your own because they've got some of the best maps available. And to make your job as the game master even easier, each map has descriptions key to specific locations on the map. So you don't have to struggle to describe each section of the map or each relevant object your players might want to interact with. That's all been written for you in advance by an ENnie award-winning team of writers. And Describe is offering a discount to the viewers of this channel. If you visit describe.com/supergeek and use the promo code SUPERGEEK at checkout, you can save 10% off of your first subscription payment. Once again, that's dscryb.com/supergeek. Thanks so much to Describe for sponsoring this video. Now, Saundor's lair did have a couple of other combatants, 2 corrupted treants that sprung to life and fought the heroes on the ground. But what if, and hear me out, there were more bad guys in the lair than just 3 guys? And Where Evil Lives doesn't just give you a bunch of more baddies, but it also uses these extra baddies to help vary up the kinds of bad guys who are present in each lair. The hag lair isn't just home to a hag, but she also has some trolls and a chimera lurking in her home. The undead library is full of spectral undead, light thieves, which are a bunch of little fiends that fly around, and a whole mess of oozes. The Molten Enclave is a fire giant stronghold, so it's mostly staffed by fire giants and hellhounds, but there's also a stone giant working there. The Ruins of Rathrock is the lair of the MCDM's Aboleth equivalent, and he's served by a humanoid gang and a bunch of slime servants/soldiers. There's some variety there. The Canyon of the Tower Crown is full of different demons, and each demon is pretty wildly different from the others, so already that gives you just a lot more to work with. And that's just a sampling of some of my favorites. Every layer has some sort of variety, and I think that adds a lot. And of course, the benefit here is that you have a lot more little guys for the party to fight, or maybe negotiate with, on their way to the final boss. And as a reminder, the team at MCDM adapted the minion rules from 4th edition to be more compatible with 5th edition, so a lot of these monsters are minions who will go down in a single hit. And that helps the players feel like unstoppable badasses, and makes the game more cinematic as the heroes fight through hordes of enemies without being cut to ribbons by a whole bunch of sacks of hit points, when that's not the desired effect of the designers. And of course, most of these layers do also have some additional bad guys in the room with the final boss, just like Saundor did, to help keep that final fight from just being completely one-sided in favor of the heroes. But they also have some other bad guys spread out throughout the other chambers, making the entire lair a lot more dynamic. But of course, Saundor was specifically alone. He had no one. That was his whole deal. But he also did have 2 corrupted treants, so he also could have had other mindless servants elsewhere in the lair, other blights, or maybe even undead bodies of former adventurers or Feywild residents who had denied Saundor's advances. After all, Saundor did tell Vex that he would kill her and she'd stay with him forever. What if that was actually true, and zombies or ghosts lingered in the lair, serving and doting on Saundor with empty praise, and it's implied this would also be the fate of Vox Machina if Saundor won the fight? Another option was that some unrelated baddies and monsters could be living in the lair. If we look just outside of Saundor's lair at the swamp itself, that does seem to be the case. There are trolls that swim through the muck and other creatures that we didn't get a chance to see. These monsters don't literally serve Saundor, but they are in some sort of parasitic or symbiotic relationship with him. They benefit from his corruption because he causes a lot of death, or draws in additional prey, or whatever might happen to be the appeal for each one of those monsters. And some of the lairs in this book have monsters that fill similar roles, or are otherwise present for some reason besides just serving the big bad guy. The Goblin Lair has a giant spider that eats any prisoners the goblins want to dispose of. One of the keys in the Orc Lair is actually a trained mimic, ready to attack anyone who tries to use the wrong key. And sometimes, the other monsters or NPCs are not actually affiliated with the lair or its master, but are instead there for some other purpose or otherwise serve the plot in some way. The goblins in the Goblin Lair have a goblin adventurer as a prisoner, and the hag has a kobold imprisoned in her boss fight room. The mill has a sea hag apprentice in the pond nearby, and she hates the baron who runs the mill, so she could be a useful ally. There's a ghost adventurer in the ruins of Rathrock, and as for the goblin camp, if the players can't figure out how to get inside on their own, a devil notary will appear and offer to help get them inside, if they're willing to make a deal. Which is actually really funny. I just made a whole video about making a deal with the devil. Go check it out. It's just a funny coincidence that happened to come up in this video too. Speaking of potentially helpful but also very sinister NPCs, the White Tower includes a Time Raider enemy who could be flipped and turned into a potential ally, though that is not at all a sure thing, but it is possible. And those are some of the reasons why it would have been really nice if there were some more minions and baddies in Saundor's lair. Because every NPC, every monster, and every henchman offers the players a choice, and the fewer of those you have in your evil lair, the less there is for your players to actually do during the session. Speaking of things to do, what if there was other stuff in the lair? Specifically, traps to try to mess with the heroes, and assets the heroes could leverage to their own benefit. I didn't write down every trap, but a few of these caught my eye. There's quicksand in the Canyon of the Tower Crown, and the Orc Lair has magical lanterns that can be used as warnings to put the entire base on alert. And there's just nothing like that at all in Saundor's lair. And some of the lairs in this book have assets that could help the party out as they make their way through the dungeon. For example, the Goblin Lair has a bunch of explosive alcohol that the PCs can use if they get really creative. Even the Orc Lair chapter makes sure to remind you that there are tables that can be used as cover by either the bad guys or the good guys. And once again, Saundor's lair has the vines on the walls, but that's basically it. And throughout each of these layers, the players can find valuable items, including some magic items. And while some of these can be located in the Big Bad's vault or hoard, others are just scattered around some of these layers. In the Hag Hut, you might be able to get your hands on a spell scroll of Remove Curse and some Dust of Disappearance before you even face Strigonona. And that's not the only layer where that's the case either. Plenty of layers have some smaller rewards mapped out around the map. But of course, that brings us to another big bummer about Saundor's lair. There's not even any loot once they kill the bad guy. Oh sure, there's the legendary magical artifact they came here for, and that's all well and good. But there's really nothing else to reward the players for their effort, and that's kind of a shame. Granted, Matt was in a funny situation where his players had way too many magic items since they'd just left over from Pathfinder, and those items were now pretty overpowered. Plus, Matt had also given them way too many items once they were in 5th edition because he didn't know the best balance yet for his games, and also because he gave his players a magic item shop and they could just buy whatever they wanted. They had a shitload of gold, so they bought a bunch of awesome stuff very early in the live stream. That's one of the reasons I don't like magic item shops, but I've talked about that before. But of course, we're now 10 years into the lifespan of 5th edition D&D, and the talented team at MCDM has a much better sense of how to best use magic items than Matt Mercer did back in 2016. And so not only does each layer give you some magic items, but also I believe each layer also gives you an original magic item that was created by the folks at MCDM. And that's pretty cool. Additionally, the Horde of a big bad boss can be used for storytelling, which is why my favorite item in any of the hordes of this book isn't one that's clearly useful, like the way a Monocle of Secrets is, or the Bag of Holding might be. No, it's the item in the Orc Horde that simply reads, a bronze dwarf skull that screams when looked at. That's it. That's all it does, and it's fantastic. I love it. Look, like I said at the top of this video, this is not meant to be an indictment of Matt Mercer as a game master. We don't know if Matt had more in mind for this layer and just chose to cut a bunch of it for time. That doesn't generally seem like that's how he handles time crunches in this campaign, but it is certainly possible that he was trying to get through the Feywild arc in this session. Alternatively, it's possible that he thought of the entire bog as a vast lair for Saundor, even though Saundor never leaves his tree. And while I would still view this big lair as having a lot of the same problems, it would also be a way for Matt to get some other monsters and environments in there before what he might have considered as the final boss and final arena of this wider lair. Again, we don't know what was in his head. But also, and perhaps most importantly of all, he designs his encounters and villains and lairs for an audience of 7 players. I can look at Saundor's lair and lament that I wouldn't find it fun as a game master or a player, but that doesn't really matter that much to Matt Mercer, and it really shouldn't, because nobody else is going to run this battle but him, and nobody else is going to play through it besides the people at his table, and so he designs adventures towards their preferences and their style. And while we have no idea what his players thought of this layer, we do know that the fight was great, and that was probably Matt's priority. However, a lot of people do still learn to run D&D games from watching Critical Role, and I think a layer like Saundor's teaches a lot of bad habits. So that's why I wish Saundor's layer was more like the layers in this book. But thankfully for all of us, this book exists, and we can just drop these layers into our games. In fact, flipping through this book, I got a ton of ideas for future adventures and full-on campaigns. But that's a topic for another day. This is not the last time you're going to see me talk about this book on this channel, I can promise you that. But if you want to keep up with all my future videos, then make sure to subscribe and hit the bell, hit the like button, and leave a comment to let me know if you've read this book, and if so, do you have a favorite layer from inside? If not, did this video make you excited about picking it up? This video was not sponsored by MCDM, nothing like that. I like this product a lot, and I think you might like it too. But if you want to sponsor this channel, you can support me on Patreon or Ko-fi or by becoming a YouTube member. You can also just hang out with a bunch of other viewers on this channel by checking out my Discord server and sign up for my newsletter to catch all my updates. Click here to watch a video about what I keep on the back of my GM screen. That was a great video. You'd like it. I can tell. You specifically would like this video, so watch it. Until next time, play fair and have fun.